The candles were never lit for prayer. They were lit for spectacle, for secrets, for silence. And the door, always half open, was not a mistake. It was an invitation. Her bedroom was the quietest room in Rome, not because it was empty, but because it remembered. They say one of the lovers bled from the mouth before collapsing. No wound, just red foam and a kiss. They say another begged her for wine, and she smiled, only smiled. No guard stopped them. No servant screamed. Only the priest years later muttered, "Forgive me," into a locked confessional, where no god listened. She walked through the Vatican gardens barefoot once. The grass turned black the next day. A coincidence, they said. Like the miscarriages, like the fevers, like the disappearances. They tried to blame the brother, then the father, but never her, because her hands were soft, her skin untouched, her smile too beautiful for suspicion. And the men who died in luxury, on silk, with pearls on their chests. Not murdered, just forgotten, just missing. And so history wrote it in dust. Lucrezia Borgia loved too much, and too quietly. She was born behind veils. A daughter not of love, but of alliance. A name whispered in corridors before it was ever spoken aloud at baptism. Lucrezia, blonde, radiant, with eyes too knowing for innocence. In paintings, she's shown with lilies, halos. A gaze turned modestly downward. But those who saw her up close remembered something else. A stillness too composed, a silence too watchful. She learned young that Rome was not a city, but a stage. Her father, Pope Alexander VI, taught her that power wore robes. Her brother, Cesare, taught her that power also drew blood. And she, quiet between the two, learned that power could wear perfume. She married young, too young. The wedding was a sentence, the groom an obstacle. The banquet glittered, the guest list gleamed with enemies. They toasted her with poisoned wine, and she smiled anyway. When her husband died, rumors whispered she knew the exact hour she wore black for a week. Then red, then white, and no one dared ask why. They tried to write her as a puppet, but puppets don't choose who dies. Puppets don't keep rings with hair inside them. Puppets don't smile when the chalice spills just a little too easily. Lucrezia Borgia was no heroine, and never a victim. She was a daughter offered, a bride sold, a woman traded. And still, she watched and learned and waited. Her lips always moving not in prayer, but in calculation. Her laughter never loud, just long enough to echo, even when alone. She did not need a sword. She did not need to run. She only needed time, and a bedroom no one dared to search. The records show no crime, but the walls remember, and the perfume never fades. It didn't happen all at once. Her downfall was not a collapse, but a quiet folding, like silk drawn slowly into water. It began with letters carefully folded, sealed with wax, tucked into hollow rings, and slipped into the hands of trembling couriers. The messages they carried never used her name, only symbols. A rose pressed in ash, a serpent coiled around a chalice, a dagger drawn upside down. The men who received them knew what they meant. Some returned for more. Some never returned at all. And still, the messages continued. Some were love letters. Some were invitations. Some were instructions. They could never prove which were which. And that was the point. The ambiguity was the poison, not just the liquid itself. Her second husband died suddenly, internal bleeding. They said, no visible wound, no confession. The doctors blamed his liver, but those who buried him recalled the scent of bitter almonds. The night he died, she wore a violet ribbon and did not cry. In the weeks after, she embroidered her initials into handkerchiefs lined with silver thread, LB. Some say they found one later beside a goblet, untouched, beside another dying man. They say the Borgia family plotted her life as though it were a chessboard. But they misunderstood the queen. They thought she moved by orders. In truth, she moved by silence. Lucrezia never had to command. She only had to observe, while her father signed bulls and her brother spilled blood on the streets. She poured wine, touched arms, listened, and listened, and listened. She once sat beside a man she despised for 7 consecutive dinners. Every evening he toasted her. Every evening she smiled. And on the 8th evening, he failed to appear. The court claimed he had fled Rome in shame. His body was found floating in the Tiber 2 weeks later, bloated, eyes open. She never mentioned him again. But her fall was not about bodies. It was about what they made of her. The artists began painting her with softer eyes. The priests whispered her name less and less in their sermons. The records began omitting her from events she attended. Her absence was curated. She was vanishing in real time, like a stain being scrubbed out of history. And yet, behind the walls, her bedroom remained unchanged. The same curtains, the same vial hidden beneath the floorboard, the same lock with a key she never gave away. She married again. This one was supposed to save her. Alfonso of Aragon, young, handsome, foolish. He believed her innocence. He believed her tears. But Rome does not reward belief. Soon enough, he became inconvenient. He was stabbed twice in the Vatican. Not killed. Not yet. He recovered enough to speak, but not enough to walk. He lay in bed. She visited him daily. They say she wept at his side. They say she prayed. They say she kissed his forehead. Until one night, when the guards heard no sound, and in the morning, his body was cold. The physicians found no new wounds. His eyes were open. She did not attend the funeral. They say she collapsed after that. But collapse is a word for those who break. She did not break. She changed. The colors she wore darkened. She spoke less. Her letters became briefer. Her handwriting, once round and elegant, turned narrow, slanted, secretive. She stopped attending court. When visitors came, they were led only as far as the antechamber. She received them behind a curtain. Her voice reached them like incense, soft, strange, lingering. It was then that the rumors turned from scandal to fear. They whispered not of lovers, but of disappearances, not of trysts, but of shadows. A midwife vanished. A stable boy drowned in a fountain with no water. A nobleman collapsed mid-dance. All had been near her. All had once touched her hand, but she was also protected. The Pope, her father, refused any accusation. Her brother, now a duke drenched in blood, silenced anyone who asked too many questions. And so she became untouchable, not because she was pure, but because purity was irrelevant. What mattered was her utility. As long as she served the image, she was safe, until the Pope died. Suddenly, grotesquely. They said his body swelled, turned black, stank of rot before the funeral rites even began. The conclave that followed stripped the Borgia name from Rome like mud scraped from a boot. And with it, Lucrezia was exiled. Politely, diplomatically, but entirely. She was married off again, this time to Ferrara, a colder place, a place of protocol and distance. There, she became a duchess, but not in spirit. In Ferrara, she was watched. The walls were thicker, the servants better trained, her movements recorded, her bedroom locked from the outside, but even there, she found cracks. Servants can be bought. Walls can be whispered through, and poison can be smuggled inside perfume bottles, sewn into lace, dissolved into sugar. She no longer needed to hide in Rome. The Borgia name had already done its damage. Now, she operated in shadow, not to conceal, but to endure. She had learned. There was no safety in innocence. only in control. Her father had ruled through faith, her brother through fear. She ruled through absence. Her enemies could not strike what they could not see. Her presence became a myth. They feared her most when she smiled. They feared her more when she didn't. Years passed. She bore children. Some lived, some did not. The women whispered that her womb was cursed, that her blood was tainted. But the men still came. They always came. Dukes, artists, priests. One even kissed her ring and died the next week. Heart failure, they said. She didn't wear the ring again. And still, her name was not spoken. Official records showed a quiet, noble life. A good wife, a patron of the arts, a mother, a duchess, nothing more. But the servants knew better. One recalled that no mirror ever stayed long in her room. Another remembered that her dog once barked endlessly at an empty chair. A third, dismissed without reason, claimed that her window never opened, and yet petals were always found on her sill, as though left by unseen hands. She wrote letters still, but not in ink. She pressed words into pressed flowers. She stitched them into hems. She breathed them into those who dared to listen. And sometimes, very late at night, a candle would flicker for no reason in the hallway outside her room, and no one would approach. When she finally died, they claimed it was illness, complications from childbirth. Her body was dressed in white, her hands folded, a crucifix placed between her fingers. But those who prepared the corpse noticed her mouth, not open, not closed, just parted. As if caught in the middle of a whisper, they buried her in a convent, quietly. No procession, no grand mass, just bells tolling once, twice, then silence. But the room she once slept in, the one no one dared enter, was sealed, not cleaned, not emptied, just locked. And even now, they say, no one stays in that wing, not because it is cursed, but because it remembers. And memory, in Ferrara, is dangerous. It was not a single death. It was a repetition, a ritual, a pattern written in breath, in perfume, in quiet. Each lover was a ceremony, each betrayal, an altar. Lucrezia did not kill them in rage. She killed them in rhythm, one after another, a procession, and Rome learned to look away, not out of ignorance, but out of reverence. For in the center of every death was beauty. In the center of beauty, silence. The execution did not begin with poison. It began with trust, always with trust. A glance, a touch, a night where her voice dropped just low enough to be mistaken for truth. And they priests, dukes, diplomats leaned closer, thinking they were chosen. They weren't. They were selected to be remembered by forgetting. The room where they died was not decorated in black. It was candlelight and crushed velvet, the scent of lilies and wine. The windows were always slightly open, not for escape, but so the final breath would drift out into Rome, unnoticed, unclaimed. She would sit beside them as their throats grew tight. She would whisper to them, not with cruelty, but with care. And when the poison began to hum beneath the skin, when the eyes widened, she would lean in and say one final word. Sometimes it was listen, sometimes forgive. Once, it was just their name. One man tried to fight it. He clutched his chest, stumbled toward the door, but his knees gave out on the threshold. She didn't move. She watched, not coldly, not cruelly, but like a mother watching a child slip into sleep. Another man wept, begged her to help. She wiped his tears with the hem of her gown. He died with his face in her lap. She did not cry. But it wasn't just the deaths, it was what followed. Always the same. The bodies were never mutilated, never left in shame. They were cleaned, dressed, adorned, laid on silk with hands folded, mouths closed, It was a sacrament. She made sure of it. Even death had to be beautiful. Otherwise, they might look too closely. The servants never spoke. Not because they were loyal, but because they were afraid. Some were bribed. Some disappeared. The ones who stayed learned never to knock, never to ask why a room smelled of myrrh for days, never to mention the name of the guest who arrived but never left. The city began to whisper her, but quietly. The Vatican, shaken by its own sins, did not speak her name. They knew that to condemn her would be to unearth what they had buried too deep, and no one wanted to smell that rot again. Not in public, but the rituals grew darker. One lover died during Lent. A scandal. A priest demanded penance. She invited him for tea. He blessed the cup. He drank. He died 3 days later. No marks. Just a note in the church records, Brother Malachi. Called home. They did not call it sin. They called it mystery. It was safer that way. She changed after that. More deliberate, less gentle. Her eyes, once soft, now sharp. The lace she wore turned from cream to blood red. Her jewelry heavier, her voice quieter still. And yet the men came, always. They came drawn not to her body, but to her legend, to touch what they did not believe was real, to test fate with lips, with confession, with lust, and she let them. Because the ritual only worked if they came willingly. One man wrote a sonnet about her mouth. He died with ink on his fingers and foam on his lips. Another composed music in her honor. The sheet music was found beside his corpse, unfinished. A final chord scratched out, and still. She remained untouched. Legally, spiritually. Her name was not written in the trial scrolls. Her face not carved into the justice frescoes, because her crimes did not belong to law. They belonged to myth, and myth is immune to consequence. Even in Ferrara, where the walls pressed tighter, the ritual continued, slower, subtler. A visiting nobleman grew ill after a banquet. Another drowned in a bath, his head beneath water. No sign of struggle. A maid claimed to see her walking the halls at night, barefoot, holding a vial of amber liquid. She was dismissed the next morning. The vial was never found. The Duke questioned her once, softly, a curiosity, not an accusation. She looked at him, just looked, and he apologized, not because she denied it, but because she didn't. And so, the rituals adapted. Some deaths were no longer in her bedroom. Some occurred at feasts, on balconies, in gardens. But always with her present, always with a touch, a glance, a word. One man claimed she sang to him before he fell. Another said she showed him a mirror, and in that reflection, he saw nothing. They say she once placed a ring into a man's hand, not on his finger, into his palm. It was too tight. The flesh swelled. The finger turned black. He died of infection. She sent flowers to the funeral, white roses dipped in wine. And what of the bodies? Some were buried, some cremated, some never found. One corpse surfaced in the river with a note pinned to his chest, for beauty. The handwriting matched no known script, but those who had received her letters before those still living recognized the spacing, the silence between each word. The church investigated, quietly. They sent a cardinal to observe. He stayed 2 nights, left without speaking, retired within the year. His journals, later found, contained a single line beneath a water-stained page. She does not sin. She transcends. By the end, she was no longer a woman. She was a symbol, an omen, a ritual incarnate. She did not seduce. She summoned, and those who came to her came as pilgrims, hoping not to be loved, but to be destroyed in the most beautiful way possible. When the final death occurred, a painter, Known for capturing the eyes of his subjects in unnatural detail, his unfinished portrait of her was confiscated. Hidden, burned, some say. Others claim it hangs in a locked chamber beneath the Vatican. In it, she is not smiling. She is watching. The eyes are not hers. They belong to every man she ever touched. And what of her? She aged. Yes, but slowly. Her skin paled, her hair darkened. But the face remained, timeless, as though even time feared her. In the end, no gallows were raised, no stake prepared. Her death was not public, it was not loud, it was not justice, it was quiet, like a prayer that ends mid-breath. And that is how they buried her. In linen, no jewels, no headline, only silence. But the ritual did not end, because ritual lives on not in acts, but in memory. And memory lingers, in dust, in breath, in the walls of bedrooms long sealed. Lucrezia Borgia did not die once. She died 100 times, and each time she left no wound, only a story, and stories, unlike bodies, do not rot. They buried her deep, but the whispers did not stay buried. The soil of Ferrara covered her body, but not her name, not her perfume, not the images burned into the walls of every chamber she ever touched. After Lucrezia Borgia's death, no bells rang for her, no proclamations, no mourning banners across the palace gates, only the quiet clicking of locks, the sealing of doors, and a silence so thick it curled beneath the skin. Ferrara exhaled, but the air did not clear, for what she left behind could not be undone with earth. It lived on, not in justice, but in repetition, in dread, in awe, in the spaces people avoided without knowing why. The Duke wore black for 7 days, but spoke of her only once she was kind. No further detail, no praise, no accusation. It was as if speaking too long would summon something. The clergy prayed over her grave, but none would bless it twice. Some said the grass above her plot never grew again. Others claimed it grew too well, too dark, too thick, fed by more than water. The convent where she was interred began losing novices. One by one, they fled in the night. The nuns stopped sleeping near her tomb. The chapel grew cold, even in summer. But the aftershock wasn't in the supernatural. It was in the human. The men who once drank from her cups began to doubt the loyalty of their own wives. The women who had once envied her skin now covered their mirrors. Rome shifted. Her name, once said in pleasure or fear, became a code, a warning, to love too much, to trust too easily, to linger too long in a beautiful room. Her story was erased from official histories, but not from memories. In private, poets still wrote verses with no titles. Painters still copied her profile in secret. No face, just the line of a jaw, the curve of a neck, the suggestion of a mouth that never told the whole truth. Years passed, centuries blurred. Her family's name was denounced. Her father's reign declared a scandal. Her brother's crimes carved into public record. But hers remained shapeless, not because they were forgotten, but because they were never fully known. The Vatican, when pressed, acknowledged her as a daughter, as a wife, as a duchess. They never called her guilty. They never called her innocent. They called her unfortunate, the same word used for plagues, for fires, for floods. But some remember differently. A librarian in Florence refused to archive her letters, claiming they changed ink color when read under candlelight. A monk in Naples reportedly dreamed of her 13 nights in a row each time. She stood beside a river, holding a chalice filled with teeth. A chambermaid in Ferrara, 3 generations removed, claimed her mother told stories of a locked room where mirrors broke by themselves. Even the Vatican could not fully ignore the persistence. So they canonized silence. They replaced the name in records with initials. H0rribIe. They did not say what it stood for, but in the margins of dusty books, some scribbled her name again, letter by letter, as if rewriting it might summon the truth. One bishop, in a moment of madness or honesty, declared during a sermon, she showed us that poison need not come in bottles. Sometimes it smiles. He was replaced within the week, but his words lingered, carved into the back of a pew by an unknown hand. Still there, still faint, still dangerous. The aftershock was not noise. It was discomfort, the kind that creeps beneath the skin, that wakes in the middle of the night unsure why. Her life became a haunting without ghosts. Her bedroom in Ferrara was eventually opened, but only once. The man who entered wrote a single line in his report, "There is nothing here," then retired, moved to the countryside, never wrote again. And yet the stories found other ways. Children dared each other to whisper her name at night. One girl reportedly went mute afterward. Lovers quoted lines she never said, but swore they heard. Scholars debated her role, femme fatale or victim, but none could agree on the facts. Because there were no facts, only impressions, shadows on silk, a legend shaped by fear of the unspeakable. In time, history began to soften. They called her misunderstood, a pawn, a tragic beauty. But the aftershock remains in how softly they speak of her even now, as though she might still be listening, as though the perfume has not entirely faded. A French historian once attempted to write a biography titled Lucrezia, the gentle tyrant. He died of heart failure before completing the first chapter. His notes burned in a fire the same day. And so the world moved on. But certain places refused to forget. In Ferrara, a hallway remains unlit by decree. No one walks it at night. In Rome, the chamber once used for her trial, never completed, never heard, remains sealed behind a false wall, unused, untouched. And in the Vatican's vault, beneath volumes of doctrine, a single box remains locked. No label, no key. Only the faint scent of dried flowers seeps through the wood. People who speak of Lucrezia today do so in half-truths. They recall the beauty, the intrigue, the politics, but not the ritual, not the repetition, not the eyes that never blinked when a man stopped breathing. The art remains, the paintings, the cameos, the letters signed only with symbols. But the woman herself, she remains undefined, because to define her would be to contain her. And she was never meant to be contained. Not in history, not in memory, not in death. The aftershock, then, is not hers. It is ours. It is in our hunger for the beautiful lie, in our willingness to believe that innocence wears lace, that smiles mean safety, that death is dramatic and loud. But hers was none of these. Hers was quiet, repetitive, sacramental, and the world keeps repeating it. In every story where beauty excuses cruelty, in every silence where truth should be spoken, in every room where a woman smiles and someone forgets to ask why. Lucrezia Borgia is not gone. She is ritual, and ritual cannot be buried. They say her ashes were scattered, that no monument bears her name, but in the silence of Ferrara, something still breathes. Not wind, not spirit, memory, heavy and unspoken, the kind that settles between walls and lingers in linen long after the body has turned to dust. They tried to erase her, but they buried her too carefully. And what is buried carefully is never forgotten. A door creaks at night with no wind. A candle flickers beside a mirror that shows no reflection. Somewhere, a hand still reaches for a cup that was never safe. And somewhere else, a girl learns to smile before she speaks. They say she died praying. They say it was justice. But what if the prayer was not for mercy? What if it was a ritual? No conclusion, no closure. only a question that keeps reshaping itself. Because death is not the end when the ritual is still being copied. Lucrezia Borgia's body may be gone, but her name survives the way poison does, traceless in water, waiting for breath. And sometimes, that breath sounds like laughter. Sometimes, it sounds like forgiveness, but mostly, it sounds like nothing at all. Like a room that no one dares to enter.